Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Living Manna Church. I am Pastor Dave Sains, the senior shepherd at Living Manna Church. I want to welcome you to our Wednesday night Bible study. And thank you so very, very much for hanging out with me tonight. We are going to jump into the Word. We're in the midst of a study on the book of Romans. We're going to continue with that. And so I just want to say thank you to everybody that's hanging out with us tonight. And a reminder to everybody, if you are watching, whether it is on Facebook or it is on YouTube, most of the people I think watch on YouTube, but both platforms. If you would, if you enjoy, if you're fed by the ministry that we do, make sure that you give us a like. Make sure that you are subscribed. That little button that says subscribe. If it's red, you're not subscribed. Just press it so that you do get subscribed, and you get notifications whenever we put out a new video. But also give us a like so that the algorithms. The more and more likes we get, the better and better it is for us. The more and more it will be shared with other people. And certainly you can share it yourself, take a copy of it and share it with a friend. If you're being fed, if it's encouraging you, share it with someone else. This is some really important information that we really need to get out to the entire body. So with all of that, all the sort of the commercials, and of course, listen, if you're being fed, if you're being encouraged, if the things that we share, if the studies that we do, whether it is Hidden Manna, whether it is our Wednesday night Bible study, our regular weekend service, we encourage you to certainly be part of our LMC family. Contact us. Let us know who you are. Let us know where you're watching from. If you have questions, make sure you put them in the comment section. We will do our best to get back to you. Or if you just have some praise reports or even prayer requests, there's a way of getting in touch with us. You can download the LMC app at your app store. Just type in Living Manna Church, and you can be up to date on everything that we put out. All the videos, all the stuff that we're doing. And certainly if you are being fed by this ministry, I want to encourage you to support this ministry. Support us financially in what we're doing with your gifts and your offerings. Allow us to continue to do what we do in presenting the truth as we understand it to the world. So with all those commercials kind of out of the way, again, welcome everybody. I hope you're having a good evening where you are. It is Wednesday. It's the middle of the week. The week is half over now. And here we are, Wednesday night Bible study. So with that said, let's say a quick word of prayer, and then we'll just jump right into it from there. Father, as we say always, we ask for eyes to see, for ears to hear, and for hearts that are willing to obey your word. In Yeshua's name, amen. Amen. All right, so we are in the book of Romans. Got a whole bunch of neat stuff to share with you today. Now, if you've been following us in our study of the book of Romans, and I hope that you have, because you really, I guess you could just jump into it and pick it up anywhere, but there is really a progressive understanding that we are building upon week after week after week, and there are certainly some things that we'll share tonight that you really need to have understood things that came beforehand. So we encourage you definitely to listen to check out some of the older videos. We're on number 16 today. Check out the other ones so that you have this continuity of thought, that you understand exactly what it is that we're sharing. This is a very in-depth look at the book of Romans. Of course, it is impossible to cover every single thing, or else the book of Romans would take us, like 2 years to go through. So we're trying to do our best to go verse by verse, line by line. But certainly there are things that I'm sure have slipped through the cracks, but we're doing our best to get as much information to you as possible. Tonight is study number 16. This is 16, and we're really more than half the way through this. So last week I tried my hardest to get through chapter 9. We didn't quite do that, but I do promise you that today we will get through chapter 9 and into chapter 10. I cannot promise you that we're going to finish chapter 10. In fact, I know that we're not. But we are certainly going to do our best to get through as much as we can, and continue going line by line and verse by verse. So, with all of that, tonight is Romans number 16, and the subtitle for tonight, which is actually coming from Romans chapter 10 and verse 4. So we're jumping ahead just a little bit because we're gonna go back and look at chapter 9. But Romans 10 and verse 4 says the following, and this is out of the Scriptures version. For Messiah is the goal of the Torah unto righteousness to everyone who believes. Messiah is the goal of the Torah unto righteousness for everyone who believes. And of course, our subtitle for today, the topic that we're going to try to cover is, of course, Messiah, the goal of the Torah. Messiah, the goal of the Torah. Okay, so as I said, we've been going through this for a while, so we were not able last week to actually get through everything that I wanted to do as far as the study was concerned. Well, I think we got maybe 3/4 of the way there through chapter 9. So we're going to pick it up back at chapter 9. I'm not going to do a whole bunch of review. You can listen to the study that came before this. We're just going to pick it up right at chapter 9. And there is a discussion that we're in the middle of a discussion. Now, this is kind of where we left off last week in our study, where the apostle is now getting into some information that can be, if it can be a little offensive, I guess, or it can definitely rub people the wrong way if you don't understand, exactly what's being said or why it's being said. And some of it has to do certainly with the idea of predestination. That's a word that gets tossed around a lot. It depends on what version you're reading. It may say predestination. It may say foreordained, foreknowledge. But we're going to deal a little bit. Shaul is going to deal a little bit with that topic of predestination. But also, if you remember, he talked about the difference between what being the house of Israel actually is, what the true house of Israel is, as opposed to not everyone who is genetically connected to the house of Israel is actually the house of Israel. Now, I know that statement in and of itself, I know can be offensive, for people that are reading it, that are part of the physical house of Israel, a nation in the Middle East today, could read those words or listen to this study and be offended at that. Please, 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 please don't, because he's making a very, very important point to the total story of the gospel. And the point is that none of this was ever supposed to specifically be about a national identity or a lineage identity. And though they were the only nation on the planet who had the truth, so it only stands to reason that the people that understood the truth would be them. But their responsibility throughout the scripture was to take that truth and to relay it to the rest of the world. And so he gives a couple of different examples in chapter 9. We're going to jump right into it with verse 10, but he's going to actually give us two different examples. The first example is going to be that of Ishmael and Isaac. And then he's going to give us the example of Jacob and Esau to really solidify this point. And I want to, again, stress with everybody that every example that Shaul is giving us, number one, there's nothing he's teaching that Yeshua hasn't in some way already taught. There is nothing any of the apostles teach that is contrary or different from what Yeshua taught. The trick is, and the thing we got to really learn to try to comprehend here, is to understand what Yeshua taught and then understand what the apostles are saying. But that aside, every example, everything that Shaul uses to prove that what he's saying is so, and we got to wrap our minds around this, comes from the Torah. It is impossible to remove the Torah from truth. It is indeed truth. And so to kind of solidify this idea that he's saying about this idea that not everyone who is Israel, that there have been throughout all the generations, definitely of the whole house of Israel, all the tribes, absolutely faithful people who have come to the truth, lived and died in the truth, and will be there in the resurrection. But that's not all of the people who are connected with the physical house of Israel. And so today, the gospel is being spread around the world, and though we are not necessarily, or many of us anyway, are not necessarily the physical house of Israel, that is physical descendants of Abraham, physical descendants of the 12 tribes, we are still counted through the promise as the house of Israel. And we'll get into this more as we get to chapter 11. In the book of Romans, he's going to deal with the whole idea of being grafted in and what that means. That's going to be a big study when we do finally get to it. So we're building up to that idea. We're building up to that truth. So here it is, Romans chapter 9. This is the sort of the key verse, or where we kind of left off last time that we were here. So here it is, Romans chapter 9 and verse 10. And here's what it says. Of course, this is the scriptures version. So follow along with me if you can. If not, I think the notes are up, so you can check out the notes. But here it is. Verse 10. And not only so, but Rebekah, having conceived by one, our father Yitzhak, Isaac, yet before they were born. That means the kids. Of course, he's referring to the story in the Torah of Isaac and Rebekah having children. Yet before they were born or had done any good or evil. So we're talking about babies in the womb. That is quite literally what the surface or the obvious meaning of the text is implying. We're talking about them when they were in the womb. They had done nothing good. They had done nothing evil. And yet, here's a really important point that speaks to, a lot of what our culture does today. Yah knows us even in the womb. The God of eternity who knows the past and knows the future, knows who we are even in the womb. This is really, really big to understanding the whole idea of predestination and how it applies to us. But here it is. Yet before they were born or had done any good or evil, in order that the purpose of Elohim, according to choice. This is, wow, this is important because this boggles the mind of a lot of people. And I've heard a lot of people try to explain this away and kind of, contradict what the apostle is actually saying. But he is quite literally saying that Yah knew who we were in the womb. And he knew the decisions we would make and the choices we would make and whether we would hear his word or not hear his word. And he uses us accordingly. Now, I know that will probably upset people. Here's God. You tell me God uses people? Listen, you gotta get over it because God uses people. He uses them to his glory and for some really good reasons, which we will find out in just a second. So he says, in order that the purpose of Elohim, according to choice, might stand, not of works, but of him who calls. It was said to her, that is to Rebekah, it was said to her, the greater, meaning the older, the greater shall serve the lesser. As it has been written, Jacob, Yaakov, I have loved, but Esau I have hated. Now, that's a verse that pops up quite a few times. Of course, we see it in Malachi. We see it here in Romans. It's a verse that I know kind of confuses people because you read that and just the surface of what's that saying has, some major ramifications here. You're telling me God said he hated Esau, but he loved Jacob? Doesn't God love everybody? Well, generically speaking, yes, God loves the whole world, but he knows the whole world is not going to respond to him. The whole world has been given by his love what it has been given, but he knows that the whole world is not going to hear his voice because, guys, he is Yah. He is God. He is outside of our time, space, be Star Trekky and say, our time, space domain. He's not in time with us. He's different from us. His ways are different from us. His thoughts are different from us. As far as the heavens are above us, that's how Yah's thoughts are compared to us. So with that, and I know this can be offensive, Yah used Esau. He used Esau to get Jacob to where Jacob needed to be, and to what Jacob needed to do, and to where Jacob needed to go. That's not to say that, that God just, beat down Esau and just, discarded him. Esau, though Yah may know us in the womb, though Yah may know beginning and ending, the fact of the matter is we don't. Where we are in time, space, we have no idea, no understanding of what it is to be omnipotent, of what it is to know what the past is and what the future is at the same moment. So for you and I, this is real life. This is you making a decision and me making a decision. This is Esau making his own decisions based on his own will, the things he wants to do and or not to do. And also Jacob making his decisions on what he wants to do or not to do. And if you remember the story of both Jacob and Esau, Jacob is very, very sensitive to the passing down of the traditions, the death of Abraham and the whole funeral rites with that and what he should be doing as a family. He was definitely concerned about the promise, the spiritual aspect of all things, where Esau could care less. Esau, he was about, going out and hunting and doing his thing. And when it came time to prepare for this funeral for Abraham, Esau was nowhere to be found. But Jacob took the role of the elder brother, because this is really the role of the elder brother, to prepare a meal, to get ready for this memorial to their grandfather. Esau wanted nothing to do with it. But Jacob did. Jacob had a heart for the spiritual things of Yah. They know the stories of Abraham. They know what Abraham said. It was passed down to them. They're aware of it. They're not kids at this point. They're young men. But Esau decided, I don't want anything to do with that. Or at least he decided it's not important enough for me. Where Jacob, it was. And so when it says, Jacob I loved, it literally is telling us that God loved the fact that Jacob had a heart for the things of God, that Jacob was responsive, that Jacob could hear. It doesn't make that Jacob is perfect in any way, not even close. But Esau did not have a heart. And Yah, here's the thing, Yah saw that even when they were in the womb. Now, for Jacob and Esau, it's real life. It's happening moment by moment, day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year. Just because Yah sees it that way doesn't mean that for us, and here's the sort of the cynical part that people attach to the whole idea of predestination and foreordained and God knowing and God calling, is that, well, if I'm destined to wrath, then, forget it. I'm just going to go out and, just do my thing, eat, drink, and be merry, as the scripture says, for tomorrow we die. And you can have that response if you want, but that is sort of the cynical view of it, that if I'm ordained, or if I'm not ordained, if I'm ordained to wrath, then, what the heck, I just might as well just go do me, which is a very American thing to do. But the other end of it is, well, if I am ordained, if I am called, if I am quote unquote chosen, then it really doesn't matter what I do, I'm going to wind up being chosen. Guys, that is not how it is for you and I in this life. For you and I in this life, it is about your choices. It is about your day-to-day response to the things of God. It is about whether you hear his voice or not. So don't get confused on this idea of predestination or this idea of being foreordained. Shaul is giving us a window into how God sees things. Our window, imagine this. Imagine you're driving down the road, right? You're driving down the road and you decide for yourself. Nobody decides this for you. Nobody has any influence over you. You're driving down the highway and you just decide, I am hungry. And you decide to pull over at the next rest stop that is whatever service area comes up. You decide to walk into the local diner that's at that service area, and as you approach the door and you open up the door, there is a maitre d', a waitress, somebody that's working there that says, I'm going to use me, says, "Hi, Mr. Sains, welcome. We've been waiting for you. We have a table right over there for you. And on the table is a little name card that has your name, it has my name, and it has my favorite, as a matter of fact, I don't even have to order. My favorite dish is already there." And I use this example. I know it's kind of crazy to think about. On the outside of that door, before I would walk in, it was all about my choice. I made the choice. I was driving. I was doing, whatever it is I was doing. I decided to stop off at that rest stop. But on the other side of that door was eternity, was God's perspective. And from God's perspective, he had somebody waiting for me. And he had my name there. And he had my favorite meal there. And everything already planned out. Imagine how kind of freaked out you would be if that actually happened to you walking to a diner. Well, that is an explanation or my attempt to try to explain to you what predestination means. Though Yah knows, I don't. It was my decision to stop at that diner. But Yah used all of that, to prep the diner. On the other side of the door was eternity. So that's how I want you to think about it. It's your decision. It's our decision. You're making your decisions moment to moment, day to day. But from Yah's perspective, he knows the decisions we're going to make, and he's going to use them to his glory. And that's kind of, I think, what upsets some people sometimes, is that you can be used of Yah for something really, really bad, for something not good. You can be used of Yah for good, but you can also be used of Yah for bad. So in the concept or the story of Isaac, what he's trying to tell us is Isaac, of course, so we got Jacob and Esau. Let's put that aside for a second. Remember, there are two examples that were given in verses chapter 9 about both Isaac and Ishmael, but also about Jacob and Esau. If you remember the story of Isaac and Ishmael, Yah promises Abraham a child by promise. It's a promise. You're going to have a son. Abraham and Sarah don't get that son, at least in the time that they think they should, and they come up with their own plan. Of course, Abraham, you can be with the concubine Hagar, and out of that comes a child named Ishmael. That was the works of the flesh. That was Abraham and his wife Sarah trying to produce the thing that God said by their own effort. And of course, that fails miserably. It was not Ishmael. And of course, you know the story. Ishmael gets kicked out with his mom twice, gets kicked out, and, get the woman and the slave woman and her son out. Huge spiritual lessons. And then, of course, the son, the actual son, Isaac, was a product of a promise. It was nothing. There was nothing that Abraham and Sarah could do to rush that, to make it happen when they wanted it to happen. It was going to happen in Yah's timeline. And what he's trying to tell us is that this understanding of who Yah is, this coming to him, is not based on the efforts like Abraham and Hagar and Sarah, the efforts of the flesh. There is nothing that can be done in and of our flesh, because our flesh is so substandard to who God is, to the promises and the way he's working things out. It's teaching us the lesson that by your own efforts, you cannot attain the promises of God. You only attain the promises of God, like Abraham, by believing what it is that Yah said. And of course, the child is born, Isaac. And we read later on, I think it's in Genesis, in Genesis 22, when he tells Abraham to take your son. And notice he says, take your son, your only begotten son. I think that's verse 1 or verse 2 of Genesis 22. That's not by accident, guys. That is distinct. That is planned, because the way God saw this, what Abraham, that's not that Ishmael is a horrible person, or that Ishmael is I don't know. It wasn't about what Abraham did with his wife or with Hagar to get Ishmael. That was not the way God was going to deliver the promise. It was through promise. So being the product of the flesh does not produce the promises of God, is the first lesson. The second lesson, as we just saw, Jacob the younger will rule over Esau the older. Now, just culturally, that's out of order because it was the eldest son by tradition, by rule, by law, that would be the inheritor of everything. But of course, that gets flipped over because Yah saw their hearts even before. So he uses Esau and he uses Jacob to bring about what he's going to bring out, which tells us, similar to the story of Isaac and Ishmael, that it's not by your own efforts, it's not by flesh, but it is neither by lineage. It's not by the rules of men. It's not about a birthing order. Yah chose Jacob, and he saw what Jacob would do and said, Jacob I loved, because I see what's in his heart. He will be the next of the fathers from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob. But Esau, because Esau wanted nothing to do with it, and Yah knew it, he used Esau. And I know that can be abrasive to some people, but quite honestly, we just got to get over it. That's the way it is. That is just the way it is. God uses who he wants to use in the way that he wants to use them, and that's it. I know it's kind of offensive. I get it. I truly do. I get it. I know it can be offensive, but that is the story. And that's what we get, these are the lessons that Paul is giving us in chapter 9 to help us understand how this whole thing is coming about. Now with that, I'm sorry, I went the wrong way. Here is the next verse, verse 14. Let's pick it up. Verse 14. So he asks the question. So he just finished saying, Jacob I love, Esau I hated. It's not by lineage, it is by promise. It is by choice. Yah knew who they were, and he used them accordingly. So, you think about that on an earthly level, and again, cynically, you could say, well then, what do I have to do with anything if this is all kind of made up? It's not made up, not where we stand. It is from Yah's perspective. Here's verse 14. Shaul then poses the question, what then shall we say? Is there unrighteousness with Elohim? In other words, and again, it's in the yellow. Everything you see in the yellow is kind of my commentary on it. Everything you see in the red is just me kind of trying to emphasize it for you. He's saying, is there unrighteousness in Elohim? In other words, is there something wrong with God? That's not a good thing. That's kind of bad. God's just going to use people. Is Yah wrong for doing that? And of course, his answer is, let it not be, or let's just put it down to, let's boil it down to its basic. No, it's not wrong for God to do that. And listen to what he says as part of the answer. For he says to Moshe, I shall have favor, grace, upon whomever I have favor, and I shall have compassion on whomever I have compassion. Of course, Shaul again is quoting Torah, because Torah is the basis for everything. He's quoting the book of Exodus, chapter 33 and verse 19, where Yah ascends the mountain again and wants to see the very presence of God and is put into the cleft of a rock. But in that whole experience, Yah lets him know this is not new. What Shaul is telling us, what he's actually telling us is, this isn't new stuff, guys. This isn't stuff that, I just kind of came up with. This is how Yah revealed himself right from the beginning. And let's put it into more modern sentences. I'm going to do what I want to do. And I'm going to have favor, grace on whom I choose to have favor on. And I'm going to have compassion on whom I have compassion on. Period. That's it. Are you talking to me? That's kind of, I know it's kind of a weird, but that's what he's saying. He's saying, look, I'm God. I'm going to have favor on whom I have favor, and I'm going to have compassion on whom I have compassion. There's me, the God of creation, and then there's you. And this is how it is. He's not asking for Moses' input. He's not asking for Moses' approval. He's not asking for your approval. He's not asking for my approval. Yah is telling us how it is. And I think we've come into a time in our culture where everybody's got an opinion, and this is what I believe, and this is what I feel, and this is what I like, and this is what I don't like, and this is how it should be or it shouldn't be. We're not used to hearing, from an authoritarian perspective, no, this is how it is. This is how I do things. You want to be part of the program? This is how I do things. That's very much the flavor of what he is saying here in verse 14. Verse 15, he goes on to say, verse 16, so then it is not of him who is wishing, nor of him who is running, but it is of Elohim who shows favor. And what he's telling us is that it has always been this way. This is not a quote unquote New Testament thing. This is a Bible thing. It has always been about Yah's grace. It has always been about who Yah sees who we are, knows his own, and will have grace and use people according to that, or for those to whom he knows will not come, will not have an ear to hear, he uses them too, and we're going to find out in a second, to bless those whom he wants grace and favor on. Now, I know maybe for some you can wrap your mind around this. Maybe it's, but for many people, this is a tough concept to really kind of put their mind around, because we've made God into our own image, that God has to be like us. He has to think the way we think. It does not work that way. Guys, just the term God. He is God. We are not. That should tell you a whole lot just right there. And like I said, there is, so this principle that Paul is bringing out to us, while it can be offensive if you don't understand the whole perspective, is not new. It's not new because he just showed us in Exodus 33, that's the way it was. But Yeshua reconfirms this. He says the same exact thing. Again, Shaul does not preach or teach, or any one of the other apostles, do they preach or teach anything that is in opposition to what Yeshua has already said and or established. And listen to John, this is the Gospel of John, chapter 6 and verse 44. It says, here's Yeshua speaking, no one is able to come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I shall raise him up in the last day. It has been written in the prophets, and they shall all be taught by Yehovah. Everyone then who has heard from the Father and learned comes to me. Now we could probably spend 20 minutes just on this verse, but let's take the meat of this in connection with Shaul is saying. Yeshua is telling the people that he's speaking to, but all generations of us, you don't come to me, you can't come to me unless the Father draws you. Later on in John chapter 10, he says, my sheep hear my voice. If you're not of my sheep, you won't hear my voice. If you're of my sheep, he knows those who are his sheep, and he draws them. So here is a tremendous principle that Yeshua is confirming. You cannot come to him. You cannot understand who he is unless Father draws you. And why would Father draw you? Because he knows you are like Jacob. Jacob I loved, Esau I hated. Your heart is open to being drawn. Your ears are open to hearing. You are open to Yah's word being inside of you. You have fear of who he is, and out of that fear grows great wisdom. And Yah knew that that is who you would be from the day of your conception, from the time that you were in the womb. I know this is a heavy. This is definitely one of those chicken and egg kind of things. But it's also, very heartwarming to know that if you are in faith, if you truly are trying to walk, trying to understand, it is because Yah knew who you were, and he knew that you would respond to his voice. And that, to me, that is so heartwarming. That is amazing. Of course, there's the other side of it as well, but you know what? Don't worry about the other side. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. You walk your walk the way you are supposed to walk your walk, and respond to him. So here it is, the same principle that it is that Shaul was using. So here's verse 17, the next verse. I want to try to finish chapter 9 and get into chapter 10 for our title for today. So here it is. So this is the next thing. So he's still continuing talking about the same topic. For the scripture says to Pharaoh. So now he's going to give us another Torah example of this foreordained, predestined, to wrath and or to salvation. For the scripture says to Pharaoh, for this same purpose I have raised you up, to show my power in you, and that my name be declared in all the earth. Now he is quoting the book of Exodus, chapter 9, verse 16. I encourage you to guys go ahead and look that up and read the context, few verses before, few verses after. But the context and the way Shaul is using this is right in context. He is showing that, guys, again, this has been this way forever. What he is saying is Yah knew what Pharaoh would do. He knew Pharaoh's heart was against him. He knew Pharaoh would not listen. So if that's the case, if that's how Pharaoh's heart is, then Yah used him. Period. That's it. Yah used him. But what did he use him for? What I mean, it wasn't just, using him to burn him and throw him away. There was a purpose of using his rebellion to produce something else. And here it is, verse 18. He says, so then he, God, favors whom he wishes, and he hardens whom he wishes. Guys, let's just take the plain meaning of the text. God used Pharaoh. Of course, Pharaoh thought he was in charge the whole time. Pharaoh was making all of his own decisions. Pharaoh was rebellious. Pharaoh got his army together. Pharaoh pursued them. But Yah knew that would be the case and used that evil. Esau, Jacob I loved, Esau I hated. He used that which he hated in Pharaoh to bless the people of God. Verse 19, then you shall say to me, why does he still find fault? So here's the next sort of cynical view of all this. Well, if Pharaoh was destined to wrath and he was always going to do what he was going to do, did God do that? Is this God's fault? Can I blame him for this? No, you blame Pharaoh for that. Pharaoh made his decisions. Pharaoh decided what he was going to do or not going to do. Yah, knowing what Pharaoh would or would not decide, used what Pharaoh did or did not decide. That is not the same as saying that he was made for this purpose, that he was made to be rebellious. That is a totally different monster there. That is not what's being said, but that God used what was already his decisions, as he does with us all of us. So then you shall say to me, why does he still find fault? So the kind of the question is, well, if Pharaoh was always destined to that, then he really can't, beat up Pharaoh for being Pharaoh. Oh, yes, he can. Yes, he can. Absolutely, he can. For who has resisted his counsel? And here's his answer to it. It's kind of a snide answer, but I get it. I get his answer. He's like, all right, so if I'm destined to wrath and God's going to use me for wrath, and I'm just a puppet, and he's just going to use me the way that he sees fit. No. Hey, that's not the situation. But even with that, listen to what his answer is. Verse 20. But who are you? Who are you, O man, to talk back to Elohim? Shall that which is formed say to him who formed it, why have you made me like this? So the thing about the question is here, oh, this is God's fault. God made me rebellious, and that's why I'm Pharaoh and I'm doing the thing. No, that's not how it works. But who are we on this end of things to make that accusation against God, is what he's saying. To say, why have you made me like this? Verse 21, does not the potter have authority over the clay? And I underline that in blue because I want to give you a little tidbit of information here that's sort of unrelated, but related in sort of a second or third cousin type of way. So over the clay, does not the potter. So he's using the example of a potter. Obviously, the potter is Yah. And if you think about a potter with clay, the clay is nothing until the potter begins to mold it and make it. And whatever form comes out of that is a pot or a cup or whatever it is. But who has authority over all that? The potter does. So he's sort of using an earthly example to try to help us understand this grand, this eternal perspective. Does not the potter have authority over the clay, from the same lump to make one vessel for value and another vessel not for value? And what he's actually saying is, doesn't he have the right to use one based on how it's made, what it looks like, to bless the other, to use one to destroy, to use one to build up? Who has the authority to do that? Only the potter does. Only God does. But we're not God, and we are the clay. So we've got to deal with the circumstance and the situation that we have been dealt with. Okay, so let's get into the next couple of verses. I'm sorry, I went the wrong way. Now I highlighted. Let me jump back just for a second. I highlighted this. Let me pop this up here. This idea that, he's talking about human beings now. He's talking about the creation, and he's speaking in the terms of both a potter and clay. And obviously, he is the potter. He's the guy, making things. We, or the entity making things. We, of course, are the clay, that which is made. And that same analogy is consistent, throughout the scripture. It says that God formed Adam from the dust, from the clay, from the dirt outside of the Garden of Eden. He is literally clay that Yah breathed into and gave life to. At least that's, that of course that is the account. So this analogy of clay is consistent through the scripture. So I want to give you, and again, I cringe at having to use this term because I don't want you to think in any way I'm approving of it, but it's the way the term is used today in our culture. I want to throw you an Easter egg, just a little hint, just a little bit of information that maybe you can then take after you get this and go run this down and do your own study and see where Yah, how Yah opens up things to you and what you will understand. And of course, at another time, we'll talk about this in depth. But the Easter egg, of course, is the clay. And you can see on the picture there is, of course, a artist rendering of the story of Nebuchadnezzar and the dream that Nebuchadnezzar has. Of course, it's got 4 different metals in this image, this statue that he sees, and each one of these images are a successive empire that will come upon the earth. All of these empires will have a relationship to Jerusalem, to the temple, to the people of God, up until, of course, the destruction of the temple. And that fourth entity, that fourth nation, is signified by iron, and it exists in one form or another from its beginning, where the legs begin, all the way down to its toes. And of course, the rest of the dream that is interpreted by Daniel is that until a rock comes out that was made without hands from a mountain that smashes the statue, all of it, crumbling it all down. But the thing that's important to us is that at the end of that statue, there's the iron legs, and we're talking about Rome, because that's the next entity or the next nation after Greece. Rome, global power, at least what was then considered the globe, and certainly a relationship with the house of Israel, very, very important relationship. And that entity in some way will exist all the way until the coming of Messiah. That's what the statue story is telling us. But it also tells us, and you can see on the picture, that the clay will also be there, scattered amongst the toes, scattered amongst the iron. The iron's still there. Rome is still there in one way or another. But there is clay that's not adhering to the iron, but is also scattered all over the place. Well, here's 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 6, another reference to you and I being clay. It says, for Elohim, who said, let light shine out of darkness, is the one who has shone in our hearts for the enlightening of the knowledge of the esteem, the glory of Elohim in the face of Yeshua Messiah. And verse 7, most important, and we have this treasure, we have this understanding in earthen vessels, clay vessels. That's what an earthen vessel is. It is a clay vessel. We have this treasure, the knowledge of who Yah is, in clay, who we are. We're clay. So that the excellence of the power might be of Elohim and not of us. This is about Elohim's doing, not about our doing. So I'm throwing this out there to you as an Easter egg, sort of an end time kind of thing. Track that down. What is this actually saying to us then? Is this speaking about the people of God scattered all over what is the end product of the Roman Empire, however that manifests? We'll talk about that more at another study, another time. But I'm just throwing this out there, so maybe, just to kind of whet somebody's appetite, and you guys can run with that and go see how you chase that down. But really, really important stuff, really intriguing stuff. And it is going to have a relationship to what we're going to talk about in just a second, especially the idea of being scattered, because that's what the clay is. It's scattered all amongst what is the remnant or the existence of the Roman Empire in the days when Yeshua Messiah comes. Okay, so with that, let's go into our next verse there. This is verse 22. So continuing, we're still in chapter 9. So same thought, still going on. And if Elohim, desiring to show wrath and to make his power known, with much patience tolerated the vessels of wrath, prepared for destruction, and that he might make known the riches of his glory, his esteem, on the vessels of compassion, which he had prepared beforehand for glory, even whom he called not only of us, the Yehudim, the Jews, but also of the nations. So let's stop right there, and let's try to understand this. Think about what he's saying here. Yah tolerated Esau. Yah put up with all the garbage he was doing, all the disrespect he was doing, not hearing his voice. Yah will use those vessels destined for damnation. He'll put up with them and allow them. And why would Yah do that? Why would Yah continue to put up with them? Well, one of the reasons is it tells us to use them to bring glory and compassion to the vessels of compassion. And that's exactly what he did with Pharaoh. That's exactly what he did with Esau. I'm sure this has happened hundreds of thousands, if not millions of times over history, where God uses those that whose hearts are turned hard against him, and in some way to show mercy and grace and compassion and love to those whose hearts are for him, to those who do hear his voice. I get it, because, you look at that and you say, well, it sort of is the answer to, if you think about it, because people ask us all the time, why does God allow this? Why does God allow such and such? And why does God allow this to happen to children? And why does God allow this and that? Well, what it's telling us is that he patiently tolerates the vessels of wrath. And you say, why? Well, yes, to bring glory to those vessels of compassion, but I think there's maybe another reason inside of that, and I think it is for the off chance that maybe the vessel destined to wrath might have an epiphany, might wake up, might realize, because we don't know. On this side, we just don't know. We don't know when all of a sudden that switch is going to flip on the inside of us. We don't know what's going to happen with our kids and our grandchildren and our husbands and wives that want nothing to do we don't know when that switch is going to come. We don't know what the circumstances that will actually, make them come. Think about Shaul himself. This guy was killing the Netzarim, literally killing the Netzarim. This guy was as rotten could be. He was as against the things of God, though he thought he was doing right, against the things of God as can be. And yet Yah saw that in him, when approached, he would have a heart. He would be able to hear. So if you just write off people just because, they can be, I gotta be careful what words I use here. They can be ornery. They could be adversarial. They can be against. They could, diss what you believe and all the rest of that. We don't know what tomorrow holds because we're not the guy in the diner, preparing the lunch and putting the name card on the table waiting for you to walk in. That's not our job. From our perspective, we're living it day by day, moment by moment, and we don't know what someone is going to do, someone is going to say. We don't know if there's going to be a change. We don't know if the scales are going to, fall from their eyes, and all of a sudden their eyes are going to be open. So, there is, don't take this as a way to say, well, he seems to be walking with the Lord. He's destined to salvation, and that's a really evil, rotten person, and they must be destined to wrath. Guys, we don't know. From our perspective, we don't know. We got to live this day by day and follow Yah's instructions accordingly. So that's kind of my take on all of this for you guys. Hopefully understand what I'm saying. Let's go into this again. So he says he has esteem on the vessels of compassion, which he had prepared beforehand for glory, even whom he called, not only of us, the Jews, but also of the nations. Now we're going to deal with the nations in just a second, because there's a really, really big point that Shaul is making here, that if you're not sensitive to, if you don't have your Hebraic background, if we're not sensitive to our Hebraic roots, and most of us are not, for 1,800 years we haven't been, we've skipped right over this and misunderstood what was being said. Verse 25, as he says to Hosea. So out of all of these examples that he's given of predestination and called and the promised child versus the flesh child, now all of a sudden he's going to throw the book of Hosea out here after the verse. I want you to notice it in red there, verse 24. Even whom he called, not only of us, the Yehudim, the Jews, but then he says, but also of the nations. There are those, he's telling us, there are those of the nation that are called. There are those of the nation that Yah knows they will hear his voice. And this is going to be really, really important because he's telling us a lot more in the verses he chooses to use than most people are aware of. Because the book he chooses to quote after this idea of to the Jew and to the nations, he quotes the book of Hosea. He says in Hosea 2, I shall call them my people who were not my people, and her beloved who was not beloved. Now, he's talking about the nations, those called of the Yehudim, the Jews, and those called of the nations, those whom he loved, like Jacob he loved, and of course, the others as well. So he's given us this example here, or using for us, and I want you to be real sensitive to this. Why is he quoting Hosea? Why use Hosea for this? Because there is a story that these verses are attached to that he expects that the reader understands exactly what he's saying. with regards to the nations. Now, I put it in there in red. It should have been there in yellow. I'm sorry, wrong color. But he's talking about Ephraim. He's talking about the northern house in the same breath that he is talking about the nations. And we'll discover why in just a second. So he's got one quote from the book of Hosea: I shall call them my people who were not my people, and her beloved who was not beloved. Then verse 26, it says, and it shall be in the place where it was said to them. So he's still quoting Hosea, and he's talking about what was said to them, to the people that Hosea is speaking to. Again, he's not just pulling verses out of the Torah and the prophets the way most kind of preachers do today. If you listen, most preachers will pull a verse out as the beginning of their message, and they'll quote that verse, and then everything that comes after that verse has nothing to do with the context or the history or what that verse is actually about, but whatever their particular opinion or idea or whatever the message is about. That is not what Shaul is doing. If he quotes a verse from Exodus, it is because he expects you to understand what is being said in Exodus in that context, or any of the other verses, as well as expecting us to understand what is being said here in Hosea, because it is huge. Verse 26 again, and it shall be in the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, there they shall be called sons of the living God, or sons of the living Elohim. Now, the two verses that he is actually quoting, because he's pulling out two from Hosea. So Hosea is a really important book that we need to understand if we're going to understand what Shaul is actually referencing here. And he references two verses. One is Hosea chapter 2 and verse 23. And the second one is Hosea 1 verse 10. And he references them in that order. So the first one's 2:23. The second one is chapter 1 verse 10. These have major prophetic significance to what is going on, to what the process is, why all of this is going on. And it is such an incredibly important point that is so terribly misunderstood and overlooked, because we have disassociated ourselves with the Torah and the prophets, with the Tanakh. We've disassociated ourselves from the Old Testament, thinking it doesn't matter. It does matter. It is the foundation of everything for us to understand what is coming. And so now listen. So again, he's not just throwing this out there for any reason. This is really important. So let's take a look and see exactly what he is referring to, and then understand what he's actually implying in the book of Romans. And not just the book of Romans, the book of Ephesians, the book of Galatians. It's all over the place. So here it is. Let's go to the next verse. He said two things. In the one verse, he says, I will no longer have, let's just go back. I don't want to just kind of try to quote it. I shall call them my people who are not my people. And it shall be, he said to them, you are not my people. There you shall be called sons of the living God. So when you go to Hosea and you read Hosea, the story, of course, is Hosea the prophet marries a woman who is a harlot. He has children with this woman who is a prostitute, who continues to prostitute herself no matter what. And in that relationship, they got three kids. The first kid, and I didn't put it up there, but the first kid's name means scattered, Jezreel. And each one of the kids prophetically speak about what God is going to do. And here it is, to the northern house, to what we call the house of Ephraim. It's really called the house of Israel. The northern kingdom was called Israel. The southern kingdom was called Judah. So this is a prophecy specifically about the northern kingdom. And so he calls them Jezreel. Then they have another son, another daughter, and then another child. And the second child's name means no mercy, that God will have no mercy on the people of Israel, on the northern house for all that they have done. Now, when we say Israel, again, we mean Israel, the northern house. It can also be called Ephraim. It can also be called Joseph. It can also be called the northern house. All of those are fair terms. They are terms referencing the northern house as different from the southern kingdom. So here's Hosea chapter 1 and verse 6, which shows this. He says, "And she conceived again and bore a daughter, and he said to her, call her name Lo Ruhamah, which means no mercy, for no longer do I have compassion on the house of Israel," as opposed to the house of Judah, two different entities. Of course, remember that Judah in Yeshua's day is the only remnant of the house of Israel. It's called the house of Israel in Judah's day, but it's not the whole house of Israel, it's Judah. But that distinction aside, for no longer do I have compassion on the house of Israel so as to forgive them at all. So there's the judgment. They're no longer my people. I am not going to have compassion on the house of Israel. Then, actually he says, I have no mercy on them. Then he actually says, they're not even going to be my people anymore. This comes, my people, verse 9 says, then he said, call his name Lo Ami. So we got Jezreel, which means scattered. We have Lo Ruhamah, which means no mercy. And now we have Lo Ami, not mine, not my people. He says, call his name Lo Ami, for you are not my people, the house of Israel, and I am not for you. So he's about to send them into judgment. And this whole story of Hosea is to teach us what this judgment is. So these are verses, like I said, this is verse 6 and verse 9, just telling the story. Jezreel, Lo Ruhamah, Lo Ami, the scattered, those who I have no mercy on, and those who are not my people. And then the next verse, listen to what it says. Yet the number of the children of Israel, which again is the northern house. So he's going to scatter them. He's going to send them into Assyria. He's going to send them into the world. You're not my people. And I have no mercy on you anymore. You're scattered. And yet, he says, the number of the children of Israel in this punishment shall be as the sand of the sea, which is not measured nor counted. And it shall be in the place where it was said to them, here it is, you are not my people. They shall be called, you are the sons of the living God. Guys, did you catch that? It's so important that you catch this, that you get this, because the quote that Shaul is giving about the nations coming, he is quoting Hosea, which is specifically about the northern house being scattered into the nations, not being the people of God, no more mercy, and the scattered people. And yet, he is told those people who are going to be scattered into the nations are going to be like the sands of the sea. And at some point, guys, get this, at some point, those people who are not my people, those people upon whom I have no mercy, those people who are now scattered, they will be called sons of the living God. Now, how does that happen? How does that? Shaul is telling us what we are watching happen in the first century is the fulfillment of those things. So when he's talking about the nations, he's quite literally talking about Hosea. He's telling us the story of Hosea is the nations. Listen to the next verse. Let's go to the next slide. Hosea chapter 2 and verse 23. Now remember, the first child was named Jezreel. I didn't read it, I just told you about it, but the first child is named Jezreel, which means scattered. All of these are children of Hosea, children of the northern kingdom, the house of Israel. Jezreel scattered, or Ephraim, it says, and I shall sow her. This is why he calls her scattered. I shall sow her, so like sowing seed. I shall sow her, the northern house, for myself in the earth. He's telling us what is going to happen to the northern house. They are going to be sown, scattered, Jezreeled into all of the earth. And I shall have compassion on her who had not obtained compassion. That's the northern kingdom. And I shall say to those who were not my people, you are my people, while they say, my God, my Elohim. So he's talking about a huge historical change that's going to occur, that the people called the northern house are going to be scattered amongst the nations. Yeshua tells us the same story, guys, a little bit differently in a parable, but he's referencing Hosea when he does this. Here's Matthew 13:3. I'm not going to go through the whole parable, but just kind of mention this to you. Matthew 13:3, the parable of the sower. It says, and he spoke to them in parables, saying, see, a sower went out to sow. So what? Hosea chapter 2, verse 23. What did he do with Ephraim? He sowed Ephraim into the nations. Okay, great. So Ephraim is now scattered as seed amongst the nations. Matthew 13, verse 3 is telling us that the word of God will also be sown into the nations. Why? To accomplish what we just finished reading, let's go back just real quick. Yet the number of the children of Israel, Ephraim, shall be as the sand of the sea, which is not measured nor counted, and it shall be in the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, they shall be called sons of the living God. How's that going to happen? The seed is going to be sown. So when Shaul is speaking about it in Romans 9 and using these very verses, who is he referring to as the nations? The scattered people of Ephraim and all their descendants, not just in his time. Guys, it's been 2,000 years that this process of seeding, this process of getting Yah's word out, this process of people either hearing it because they are children of promise or people rejecting it because they are children of the flesh. Hosea chapter 8 and verse 6 confirms this, not this theory, because this is not a theory, this is Bible. Hosea chapter 8 and verse 6. Israel, the northern house, has been swallowed up. They no longer exist. As a nation, as the people called Israel of the northern house, they no longer, that's what swallowed up means. They are swallowed up. They've been eaten by, they no longer exist. By who? They have now become among the nations. Scratch the word nations and put Gentiles. Same concept. They have now become among the nations as a vessel, an earthen vessel, a clay vessel, in which is no pleasure. So at the judgment that's being given by Hosea, they're not my people, I'm not your God, not going to have mercy, you're scattered. Yet at some time, those who are not my people are going to be called my people. Those I haven't had mercy on, I'm going to have mercy on. So when Shaul is referring to them, or I want you to think of it this way, Ephraim has become the nations. Ephraim has been scattered into the nations. And over time and centuries and millennia, his gene pool has been brought into all of the nations. And so there is Ephraim everywhere in multiple nations all over this world, all part of the promise that those who are not my people will one day be called my people. So how is Yah going to get the nations? By seeding them. By seeding them Ephraim, and then by seeding them the word of God afterward to all the generations, to bring representatives of every nation, tongue, and tribe back into the house of Israel, from which she is swallowed up, no longer here. Ephraim has become the nations. Ephraim has become the Gentiles, scattered among them. This is a very, very important point that I want to make sure we all grasp, that we all wrap our mind around, because this then changes the entire dynamic of what we call our understanding of the New Testament. Because most today would say, well, God's done with the house of Israel, and now he's focusing just on the Gentile nations, and it's by grace, and that's it, yada, 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 yada. You guys have heard the spiel before. But that's not what Shaul is saying. Shaul is saying this is the process Hosea was speaking about, that the northern house is scattered. And this is the process of Yah now trying to bring the northern house in its Gentile form back into the house of Israel, back to being united. Here is Hosea chapter 1 and verse 10 again. But this is the whole thing now, so now listen to this. It says, "Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which is not measured or counted. Many, many nations." So he's telling us this little group, this little nation is going to become billions of people, quite literally, billions of people, many nations. "And it shall be in the place where it was said to them, 'You are not my people.' They shall be called, 'You are the sons of El.'" John chapter 1, verse 12. This is, again, in the gospel account, telling us exactly the same thing. "And the children," we'll get to John chapter 1 and verse 12. It's right underneath, but let me just read. Actually, let's look at John chapter 1, verse 12, right underneath it. Here's the same concept. "And he came to his own, Judah," because that's who Yeshua came to, "and his own did not receive him. But as many as received him, of Judah, and now of the nations, who we now know is Ephraim, scattered into the nations, to them he gave the authority to become the children of Elohim." That's exactly what Hosea said. "They're not my people. I have no mercy. Yet their number shall be as the sand of the sea, and it shall be in the place where it said, 'You're not my people.' They'll be called sons of God." That is exactly what John chapter 1 and verse 12 is saying. "To them he gave authority to become the children of Elohim, those believing in his name," in Yeshua. And the next verse, and I didn't even put it on, but I'm just going to mention it. "Not those according to birth of the flesh, but those of the Spirit." This has, just like he's been saying with Esau and Jacob and Esau and Isaac and Ishmael. This is not just a genetic thing. This is not a lineage thing. This is not this has to do with in the womb. He's going to call people who will hear his voice, scattered and descendants of people that have been scattered and become nations all over this world over the last 2,000 years. "To those believing in his name, in the name of Yeshua, the scattered seed of the house of Israel." Now, Judah is also scattered now, but this is who he's talking about in the first century in its context. This is of paramount importance because it really changes the perspective of the gospel. It is not about a Gentile church. It is not about some organization that is different and changed from what was there before. It is about restoring the descendants of those who have ears to hear and eyes to see, to those who hear his voice, back to their heritage. That's what this is all. And some are ordained to wrath. Some are not going to come. It's going to be their own decision, and Yah's going to use them ultimately to bless those who will come. That's the context of everything that is being said here. So let's go on. "The two shall be made one." If the same concept is the same idea. Now he's speaking about it in Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 13. "But now in Messiah Yeshua, you who once were," and here he uses the term far off. This is not by accident. He's quoting Isaiah by using this term. And it's really important when you read Isaiah as to what he's actually talking about. He's talking about the backslidden, the scattered, Jezreel, Ephraim, everything from Hosea. You who were afar off have been brought near by the blood of Messiah. For he is our peace, who has made both one, both Judah, who will now be scattered, at least in their future, but Ephraim, who is scattered and has become the nations. He's going to make both of those groups one, and having broken down the partition of the barrier. And of course, you can read the rest of the verses. Here, this is really important. Here's what he's quoting. This is Isaiah 57, verses 14 through 19. If you have a Bible, go check it out. Read the headline. This is about the backslider, bringing the backslider back. Well, who's Hosea talking about? It's the scattered house into the nations. They are the backsliders, and bringing the backsliders back. And one shall say, heap it up, heap it up. Prepare the way, take the stumbling block out of the way of my people. For thus declares the high and exalted one, who dwells forever, whose name is set apart. I dwell in the high and set apart place with him who has a bruised and humble spirit, to revive the spirit of the humble, to revive the heart of the bruised ones. Not everybody, those that have an ear to hear, those who will respond. For I would not strive forever, nor am I wroth forever. For the spirit would grow faint before me. He's saying, I'm going to judge. I've judged them, but I can't judge them forever. I can't be angry at them forever. If I do that, they'll be crushed. Humanity will be crushed. So Yah made a way to bring them back. This is exactly what Isaiah is saying. Nor am I wroth forever, for the spirit would grow faint before me, even the beings that I have made. They can't take it. So I've got to figure out a way to bring them back. He already figured out the way. The way is Yeshua. For the crookedness of his unfair gain, I was wroth and I struck him, the house of Israel. I hid myself and was wroth, and he went on backsliding in the way of his heart. This is what happens in Hosea. I have seen his ways, but now I heal him, and I lead him, and restore comforts to him and to his mourners, creating the fruit of the lips. And listen to this. Here is the fruit of the lips. Here's the people who profess Yah again, come back in faith, of the scattered, of the backsliders. Here's what he says. Peace, peace to him who is far off, and to him who is near, says Yehovah, and I shall hear him. That is exactly what we just read in Ephesians about those who were once far off and those who are near. This is all the same language of Ephraim. Okay, verse 27, next verse. So I want to make sure you guys got this, that he's talking about the remnant scattered amongst the Gentiles and what's going to happen over the next 2,000 years. Verse 27 says, and Yeshua cries out on behalf of Israel, though the number, Isaiah, sorry. And Isaiah cries out on behalf of it. So now he just finished quoting Hosea. I just showed you a verse in Isaiah, and now Shaul is quoting Isaiah, not by accident. And Isaiah cries out on behalf of Israel, though the number of the children of Israel be as the sand of the sea. Isn't that what we just read in Hosea? They would become as the sand of the sea. Though Israel be as the sand of the sea, a remnant, or the remnant, not all, a remnant shall be saved, delivered. He's quoting Isaiah chapter 10, verse 22. For he is bringing a matter to an end, and is cutting it short in righteousness. He's saying that Yah's going to deal with this. Yah's going to do this. How is he going to make the remnant saved? He's going to do it in quick order. Obviously, Yeshua is it. God's not playing. This is going to happen. Because Yehovah shall cut short a matter on the earth. And as Isaiah said before, if Yehovah of hosts had not left us a seed, a remnant, of Judah and a remnant of Ephraim, who is amongst the nations themselves. We, the whole house of Israel, would have become like Sodom, and we would have become like Gomorrah. This is Shaul quoting these verses so that we understand the context of what he's saying. He's saying God seeded all the nations with the seed of Ephraim, and then sends Yeshua to make quick order, as the way it says here, cut short a matter, to get the seed out to the rest of the nations, and those people with a heart, even the descendants and remnants from generation after generation after generation, with an ear to hear, not all, the remnant, they will be delivered. This is the process we've been going through for 2,000 years. This is not a Gentile organization devoid of the house of Israel. This is the nations seeded by the house of Ephraim coming back to the house of Israel, to the true house of Israel, not by lineage, not by genealogy, but by promise. These are the true children of God. This is what is being said. And we really got to get our minds wrapped around that, because it changes everything. It changes the whole story. We would have been like Sodom and Gomorrah. Of course, where is Sodom and Gomorrah today? They are not here. Where are the people from Sodom and Gomorrah? They are not here. But the people of Judah and the people of Ephraim, scattered amongst the nations, they are here. And a remnant of them are coming to faith in Yeshua Messiah. This is what Shaul is actually talking about. All right, so let me see if we can jump through this. Hopefully, I got a couple of minutes here. So next verse, it says, what shall we say then? That nations not following after righteousness, meaning Ephraim scattered into the nations, who didn't know the Torah. And I could bring you some verses, but we'll go around the mountain 3 or 4 times, but read the book of Hosea. It says that Ephraim is like a half-baked cake. Even today, we use the same term, half-baked. You don't know what you're doing. The Torah has become an unfamiliar thing to him. He's saying, so in the nations, the Torah became an unfamiliar thing. We forgot our heritage. We forgot where we came from. What shall we say? That the nations not following after righteousness, in other words, not following Judaism, not following the Torah to attain righteousness. Of course, we couldn't. The Gentiles didn't know. They have obtained righteousness. So they weren't pursuing righteousness the way Judaism does, and yet Shaul says they got it. They obtained righteousness, even the righteousness of faith. But Israel, and by Israel he means Judah, they are the Israel of the day, but Judah, following after the Torah of righteousness, that is Pharisaic Judaism, has not arrived at the Torah of righteousness, not because the Torah was never intended for that purpose. So let me say this, hopefully in a little less confusing way. The Gentiles, the Ephraim, scattered, were not even looking, they weren't doing anything for Torah, and yet they found righteousness. And yet the people who still had the book, Judah, who were pursuing righteousness on their own accord, just like Abraham and Hagar, they missed it. They missed the whole thing because the Torah, as we have read before, was never intended for that purpose. That is, to bring righteousness. It is only by faith. He says, why? Because it was not of faith. This is why Judah, or the house of Israel, missed it. Because they didn't do it by faith first, but as of works. Fleshly merit, just like Ishmael of Torah. For they stumbled at the stumbling, the stone of stumbling. The stone of stumbling is Yeshua. They didn't see it. They couldn't understand the matter of the words he said. They just didn't get it, most of them. As it has been written, see, I lay in Zion a stone of stumbling and a rock that makes for falling. Isaiah 8:14. And everyone who is believing on him shall not be put to shame. So listen to this. I only got a couple of minutes left. So Isaiah 8:14 is what he's quoting. So, it's all the same context. Here's Isaiah 8:14. And he, Yeshua, shall be for a set apart place, but a stone of stumbling and a rock that makes for falling or offense to both the houses of Israel, as a trap and a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and many among them shall stumble and fall and be broken and snared and taken away. So how is Yeshua a stumbling block both to Judah, but also to Ephraim, also to the nations? Because he just told us the nations are coming in by faith. They're attaining righteousness. Judah, who's pursuing righteousness incorrectly, they didn't get it. Well, Judah, who comes by works, that is their interpretation of the Torah, but they did it without belief, without faith, without understanding everything the Torah said was about a coming Messiah. Ephraim, the nations, we have come by faith. Many express that they have come by faith, but they refuse the works of the Torah. Yeshua has become a stumbling block to both houses. One who pursued righteousness by works without faith, one who pursued faith but no righteousness in works. That is a stumbling block to both. That is what he is referring to. Referring to here. So let's see. I wanted to just get into chapter 10 just a little bit. We only got a couple of minutes left, but I wanted to make sure we finish chapter 9. And here we jump into chapter 10. Still same thought, same argument, everything's going on. So everything we just said is valid and continues in our thought process to the next verses. Chapter 10, verse 1. Truly, brothers, my heart's desire and prayer to Elohim for Israel, again, he means Judah, the Judah of his day, is for deliverance, is for salvation, is that they would become part of the remnant. For I bear them witness that they have, and of course the scriptures version says ardor, it means zeal. They have a zeal, a hunger for Elohim. And guys, look at Judaism. They have a hunger for Elohim. Note about back then and today. They have a zeal for Elohim, but not according to knowledge. And I put in yellow so you understand what it means. Not according to the understanding of the story, but instead they understand it through religious duty, through traditional duty, through ethnic affiliation. That is not how Yah asked us to come. We come by belief that a Messiah is on his way, by faith, and then we work righteousness. For not knowing the righteousness of Elohim, because this is what they didn't know. He's telling us that Judah did not understand the righteousness of Elohim with all the information they had. They did not know how Yah gives righteousness. They were teaching to earn the righteousness and seeking to establish their own righteousness, their own religious, ethnic traditions in order to be right with God. They did not subject themselves to the righteousness of Elohim. And here's our key verse for today. For Messiah is the goal of the Torah unto righteousness to everyone who believes. He is the very store. You cannot get rid of the Torah. He is the seed that will stomp upon the serpent. Yeshua is Joseph, who starts off low and his brothers don't understand who he is, and yet saves the entire planet and becomes king. He is, in fact, the one who visited Abraham to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. He is the stem of Jesse. All of the stories, we can go through every one. He is Isaac, who is laid down as a sacrifice on Mount Moriah. That is who he is. Everything in the Torah, the goal of the Torah, the purpose of the Torah is to point all of us to the coming Messiah, to the coming Son of God. That was what it was always about. That is how it works as a tutor, to prepare us for that. But it also has another purpose we're not going to have time to get into tonight because I'm almost out of time. But they missed it. Shaul is telling us they missed it because they lacked faith. They tried doing it by tradition, by ethnicity, by nationality, by religion, but they missed the simple fact of what the book was always about: a coming Messiah. The answer, the stumbling block for the northern house and the southern house. Hebrews 3 verse 18 says, he's talking about the people at Mount Sinai now, and to whom he did swear that they would not enter into his rest, but to those who did not obey. So we see that they were unable to enter in because of unbelief. And again, we're reading the scriptures version. If you look in the King James, it says they weren't able to enter in because lack of faith. They had no faith. Wait a minute, you're talking about all the people who died and were gotten rid of in the whole story of the Exodus. The writer of Hebrews is telling us that happened to them because they had no faith. They didn't understand what this was all about. Yes. Chapter 4 and verse 22. For indeed the good news, the gospel, was brought to us as well as to them. He's saying the same story that we got to tell us who Messiah is the same story they got. It's the same message. It's maybe just a part of it, and now we're benefactors of all of it, but they got the same message. There was a coming seed. There was a coming son of Abraham. There was a coming, like I said in Genesis, a coming seed to crush the head of the serpent. They got all that. It was there for them to see. For indeed the good news was brought to us as well as to them. Always faith first, then righteousness. Abraham, they knew Abraham. Abraham believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness. They knew that. They knew what the pattern was, that through obedience, then through faith, then comes obedience and righteous living. But the word which they heard did not profit them, not having been mixed with faith in those who heard it. They did not take the Shema to heart, which is where you're supposed to put your belief in your heart. We'll stop right here for tonight. Lots of information. I really, really, really want you guys to get the connection between Hosea and the whole backsliding of Isaiah. Very, very important part because it changes the whole gospel story. So for tonight, we'll just we'll leave it right here. Lots more to say, just don't have time to do it, but we'll pick it up. We made it out of chapter 9. We're in chapter 10, first couple of verses. We'll pick it up from verse 5 on, do a little bit of recap next week. But I hope you're enjoying this study. It's definitely, for me, it's an exciting study. Lots and lots of great stuff in there that will help us understand who we are today. We are grafted into the house of Israel. Once you understand that, the rest of the story starts to come together. All right. So, guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight. I hope you enjoyed that. Don't forget to check out Morning Manna, of course, each and every morning, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. And then, of course, on Saturday, we'll have our Hidden Manna conversation. And we're going to continue with some of the great stuff we've been talking about as far as trying to put the end times in its proper perspective, or what Yeshua talks about, really the fall of Jerusalem, the fall of the destruction of the temple, and then what goes on after that right up to our day. We'll be talking about this weekend on Sunday at 10:45. So join us for all those things. Make sure you download the LMC app. Keep in touch with us and all the things that we're doing. Guys, thanks so much for being part of our Wednesday night study. Thanks so much for hanging out with me tonight. I really appreciate it. Hope you had a good time. I did. Guys, as always, God bless and shalom.